All right, we'll go ahead and get started. Thank you all for coming today to our 5 Things to Know in Top Genres with our Reader's Advisory rock stars, Rebecca Vanook and Kate Stover and Becky Spratford. Before I turn things over to them, I just want to make a couple quick announcements. We are recording today's session, but we're not live streaming. But for the recording, if you have questions, if you wouldn't mind just raising your hand so we can use the microphone, or if the presenters wouldn't mind repeating the question too. So I want to make the most just of your time today, so I'm just going to turn things over real quick to everybody. So thank you all for coming today. Welcome.
Thank you, Louise. Great. Thanks for having us. Hi. So as Louise said, I'm Rebecca Vanook, and I am the editor for collection management and library outreach at Booklist. And then we have Katie Stover, who is the director of reader services at the Kansas City Public Library, and Becky Spratford, who runs the blog RA for All. She's a library consultant. And we are here to talk to you about genre things. So, why are we telling you this stuff? So this program today is actually a spin-off of a program that Katie and I have done at the Public Library Association conference for the last 4 conferences, 2010 and beyond. And so it's a spin-off of this. We have these programs called Top 5 of 5. And we just kind of realized one day that as readers advisory people, there are times when you need quick answers for somebody who just says they want a good book, right? How often does that come up that they're like, I want something good to read, and then everything you've ever read just floats right on out of your brain and you can't remember anything. Happens to me all the time, even before I got old. So, or worse, when there's a genre that you don't read in yourself. So they're looking to you, they think you're the expert, they think you've read every book on the shelf, and they're like, well, why don't you tell me something that you like? And you're like, I don't ever read science fiction, oh no, and you kind of explode. So we came up with this program sort of as a way to kind of, what I like to frame as filling your head full of books. So you don't have to be somebody who reads science fiction on a regular basis to know 5 authors you can give somebody, or 5 books that you should know about, or 5 trendy things that are happening in the world of science fiction. So these programs kind of started as that way to kind of fill your head full of books. And when we first did this program at PLA in 2010, we had suggestions. I know, look, we're babies, right? We came up with different genres and then books and authors that we felt everyone should sort of know something about, so you could branch off and get your head full of books that way, even if you don't normally read in those areas. The inaugural program in 2010 was mystery, women's fiction, humor, fantasy, and horror. It was so popular that we got asked to do it again in 2012, where we did science fiction, romance, historical fiction, literary fiction, and thrillers. And then we were lucky again to do it twice more. We did it in 2014 and then earlier this month, 2016, and we moved on to various types of narrative nonfiction for those 2 programs. So it's just kind of a way to shoot some fast information for you. Those of you who are here today should all have the handout. And this is just this nice, quick and easy thing. Everything is listed in there. If you're watching me in the future, hi. I really hope Donald Trump's not president right now. That's probably why you're watching me, because the world still exists. So if you would like this handout in the future, you're going to be able to find that on booklistonline.com. If you search, what am I going to call this, Katie? I'm going to call this Booklist Live Events Top 5. So search for that, and you will find this handout there, people of Earth. So, moving right along. So this seemed to be perfect timing to update the original categories that we did, since the up-and-comers from 2010 are now firmly here, and we have different favorites. So we've taken a couple of those, and without further ado, today we are going to do thrillers, horror, and science fiction. So we're going to move right on into thrillers with Katie.
And
sorry, I should go ahead. Do you want to?
I was going to say,
Yes.
and now Rebecca's going to give you the nuts and bolts of what we're covering.
Yes. So,
Totally
what
planned.
you're going to get, sorry, I told you to look at the handout and then didn't tell you what to look at. What you're going to get from there, for each of these genres, we will give you 5 must-know or classic authors in the genre, 5 must-read or classic books, 5 up-and-coming authors, top 5 trends in each of the genres, and then 5 of our personal favorites. So that is, you're going to come away with a whole brain full of books here. And now we'll move into thrillers with Katie.
I will start us off talking about one of my favorite genres. And most of you probably know that when your readers talk to you about thrillers, they use a lot of the same terminology that you hear when people describe mysteries or suspense or thriller. And Rebecca and I were talking this morning, and she talks an awful lot when she gives these programs about how similar those three genres are. And they are similar, and I do break them down a little bit more. And I think of mystery and science and suspense and thrillers differently in this way. In that mysteries, there's a dead body, and somebody wants to know who did it and why. And with suspense, that's sort of an everyman in an extraordinary and extraordinarily dangerous situation. Someone might die, but that's part of a bigger circumstance that the everyman is involved in. And probably the author that does that better than anybody is Harlan Coben. You can think of his books as just the every guy who picks up his photos from the drugstore and then who slipped that photo of my dead girlfriend from college in there. That sort of thing. The kind of thing that might happen to somebody who lives in the suburbs, but good grief, why and why me? Thrillers seem to depend on a special kind of knowledge to help get the conflict resolved. So it's what the scientist knows, or what the doctor might know, or the ex-military vet, or the lawyer. It's the special pockets of knowledge that will help resolve the conflict at the end of those books. Now, what do they all have in common, these three genres? It's the pacing and the storyline that your patrons are probably talking to you about more than anything else. So when I talk about the little differences in mystery, suspense, and thriller, it's because you need to know, after listening to what your patrons talk to you about, which books you're going to go to. Are you going to go and pull a mystery for your reader? Are you going to pull a suspense? Are you going to pull a thriller? So those are just the little differences between those three subgenres of fiction that I like to think about. But then the top 5 must-know authors in this genre for thrillers: Michael Crichton, and this name should be really familiar. He died in 2008, sadly, and he's one of the first popular thriller writers to use science to scare us all. Andromeda strain, and with the deadly viral virus. Pardon?
I don't have a slide for it. It's my fault. Sorry.
Oh, okay. Thrillers? No, you were on it.
Nope.
Thrillers five must-know authors.
It's missing.
Oh, you're at the end.
Sorry.
I thought I saw that slide.
Oh, I'm a big liar. There it is.
I was going to say, she's looking at
I
it.
was going to say, I was looking at it too. Science is out to get you with Michael Crichton. And these folks, really quickly, these are the classics in the field. There are probably many more. I was limited to 5. Some of these are older names. There's a couple of newer ones, and this list could be expanded to include 25. But they've all made their name in the thriller genre, and some of them have taken their mastery of those elements and moved on to something else. So I started with Michael Crichton, Andromeda strain, Terminal Man. A computer scientist suffers seizures, so he has electrodes implanted in his brain, and then he teaches himself how to program the electrodes. Sphere, scientists investigate a giant spacecraft. Jurassic Park, that's the one you all know Michael Crichton for. That's a thriller using science and DNA to scare the life out of you and put you in an amusement park at the same time. One of the things that Michael Crichton did after writing all these science thrillers is he started to move into the corporate political thriller arena with Disclosure, a man sexually harassed by his female boss. That was in 1994. Do we remember the movie with Demi Moore and Michael Douglas? Yeah, that was this book was thrilling just because it was turning the tables on sexual harassment in the office. And Pirate Latitudes, if you didn't think a pirate yarn could be written in the 21st century, think again. This is a really good one. And it's fantastic in audio. So Michael Crichton, one of the grandfathers of the thriller genre. And then, of course, Tom Clancy, who sadly died in 2013. And he is the father of the modern military thriller. Gadgets, Cold War fallout, patriotism, daring escapes from the clutches of U.S. international enemies. Seems to change with the times, whoever it is we're mad about, or whoever it is that Donald Trump is annoying. Tom Clancy gave us The Hunt for Red October and Red Storm Rising. Those are still his best novels. If you only read 2 to be familiar with Tom Clancy, read either one of those. And frankly, I prefer Hunt for Red October. Patriot Games gave us Jack Ryan, and that's his other best-selling series. And that's also the second coming of Harrison Ford. Then Tom Clancy moved into paperback series of military adventure, and probably a little more genre and formulaic, less character development, more focus on just a ripping good yarn. And then John le Carré, who is the acknowledged grandmaster of the spy thriller. He has thoughtful, complex, literary spy thrillers. The characters face moral conundrums. The plots are complicated. There's international settings. And John le Carré wants the readers to absorb all the details and become immersed in the story. So his pacing's going to be a little bit more leisurely. You won't feel that it's a bogged down story. You'll be moving along like that in a John le Carré novel, but it's because you're so wrapped up in the story and what happens next. He's filling your head full of lots of detail and atmosphere. And he also segued into suspense. It is the later part of his career. He still kept the involved plots, but he used more of an everyman character the way Harlan Coben does. And then we have Gillian Flynn, psychological thrillers that expose the sometimes twisted psyches of women. Our psyches aren't that twisted, are they?
Not at all.
So yeah, she's out to get you. Flynn keeps the women's actions reasonable and somewhat relatable. So we're reading Gone Girl and we're thinking, yeah, this could happen, and I kind of understand why Amy's doing this. Think Black Widows and Praying Mantises. Those are the characters that Gillian Flynn is dropping on the page. Her next stop will, she'll stick with psychodramas, but she's slowly moving away from the sociopathic sophisticate, and she's moving into gothic territory. The Grown Up, her forthcoming novel, it's a reprint of a novella that she wrote in 2014. But I'm looking forward to that, because I like it when my thriller authors try to do something different. And then we have John Grisham, who is the guy that made legal thrillers the pot boilers of the season. So Time to Kill, The Firm, The Client, Pelican Brief, all those books gave us lawyers less with a heart of gold and more a sense of justice and fair play. They have roller coaster pacing, they have compelling plots, they have recognizable characters, they are cinematic in scope. His books read like water. You can digest one of those in practically one sitting. Our heroes are masters of legal shenanigans and legal sleight of hand. And Grisham's next steps from his legal thrillers, we moved into thoughtful Southern domestic drama, told with the same accessible style that he perfected with his legal thrillers. So those are the top 5 must-know authors. If you only need 5 in your pocket, these are the 5 to have. And then, must-know books. So if you just want to read 5 thrillers to be up with the subgenre, these are the ones. You should have read Da Vinci Code. Everybody you know has read Da Vinci Code. If you haven't read Da Vinci Code, well, this is the book that started a subgenre that was called arcane thrillers. The heroes are academics, they're librarians, they're archivists, they're museum curators, they're map makers, they're nerdy scholars whose brains solve the puzzle and then carry the day. That's one of the things I like about arcane thrillers, is that it's all about how smart you are and what do you know. It's not how really strong is your right hook. Da Vinci Code doesn't pretend to be anything more than what it is. A potboiler full of cliffhangers, likable heroes, some quirky sidekicks, dastardly villains. Dan Brown himself will tell you, it's not true, don't believe a word of it.
Stop trying to figure it out.
Stop trying to figure it out. And if you liked National Treasure is the movie that the Da Vinci Code movie wanted to be. Silence of the Lambs, if you really want a well-crafted serial killer. And Silence of the Lambs by Thomas Harris gave us the thriller's most chillingly likable villain and taught us how to pair wine with fava beans. As great an Oscar movie, and Oscar-worthy as that movie was, the book has a few more plot devices and a few more character reveals that make Hannibal even scarier and Claire even more tough in her vulnerability. So I'm not going to just say blatantly, the book is better than the movie, because both of them are wonderful together. They're wonderful pieces. But if you give someone the book, they'll get a little bit more to the story and a couple of textual clues to who Hannibal Lecter is and how his mind works that you just can't put on film. This is a serial killer procedural for smart readers. And then Presumed Innocent, one of the best legal thrillers of the time. Notice it's not a John Grisham one. I chose Scott Turow because this is a legal thriller that weaves a far more intricate story, also made into a very good movie. Gave us some great characters that had us questioning our loyalties with practically every page turn. Has a bang of a surprise ending, and I bet this is one of Gillian Flynn's favorite books. Movie was great too. Oh, and I did not pick it because it had Harrison Ford in it. That's just a bonus.
You picked it because Scott Turow lives right around here.
He does?
Yeah.
Can we go visit him after? Two more must-know books. I put Carl Hyacin on this list because Native Tongue is the perfect example of the comic thriller, and this is an element of thrillers that you don't see as much anymore. It was really big in the early 2000s. But we have a burnt-out reporter who's quit his job writing press releases for a Florida-based wildlife theme park, and he soon begins investigating a real estate developer's shady deals, and then the truth behind the rare blue-tongued vole. Is it endangered, or is it multiplying like lemmings? So Hyacin keeps the thrills going. It has a really quick pace, but he also keeps the stakes high for his characters, and he has oddball secondaries, and it's his witticisms that keep you glued to this story. It's not just a speedy pace, it's how funny Hyacin is, and it's the dialogue that he has coming out of the mouths of his characters. All of Hyacin's earliest work is his best, and Native Tongue stands out because this is the book that gave us Skink, the Florida governor turned environmental Robin Hood. And then, of course, Gone Girl. This one is a classic in psychological thrillers. Seriously, if you haven't read it, pick a weekend, be prepared to not get dressed, and be prepared to call someone raging about the characters and plot twists and endings. Put that person on speed dial because you will need to talk to them at 3 a.m. after you finish this book. It's okay. We'll wait if you go off to read it right now. And incidentally, this book works really well in book groups, which is not what I can say for a lot of other thrillers. You just need to ask the group, so when did you see any of this coming? And they will either throw the book at you or at the wall, but there is a lot to talk about in this book. What do we have next? Oh, 5 up-and-comings. It seems like this is the genre that's blowing up all over the place. So I want to put, thrillers are. So I want to put in a really quick plug for the International Thriller Writers Association. I get all my thriller news from their newsletter, The Big Thrill, and this website is really good at tracking the trends in thrillers. There are lots of writers who are up and coming. It was so hard for me to just pick 5. But here are 5 women who are really making a splash. So we have Mary Kubica. I hope I said that correctly, or Kubica. The Good Girl, her debut, gave us an art teacher who returns to her life months after being kidnapped and not being delivered to the people who paid to have her kidnapped. So what's up with that? There are lots of multiple viewpoints a la Jodi Picoult. Pretty Baby, her follow-up, has a bleeding heart mom inviting a homeless teen into her home that she shares with her husband and daughter. What could possibly go wrong when suburban mom brings home a homeless teen? And then look for Don't You Cry next month, more female-centered psychological suspense. And then I put Laura McHugh on this list because Weight of Blood is a great companion to Daniel Woodrell's Ozark Noir novels. It's just as gritty and menacing. It's got a fantastic sense of place. She's definitely one to watch. She has a new book coming in August called Arrowwood, where a woman inherits the family estate from which her twin sisters disappeared 20 years ago. She writes lyrically and with a strong sense of atmosphere. So look for Laura McHugh. And then Holly Brown, who's broke out with Don't Try to Find Me, and that was a very tense novel of a mother's search for her runaway 14-year-old. The 14-year-old leaves a note behind, Don't try to find me. The mom uses social media to put out the call and finds that public assistance comes with a generous dose of public curiosity and public criticism. She has a follow-up, A Necessary End, which has a few choice warnings about desperate mothers who want to adopt, reluctant husbands, and manipulative pregnant teens. Again, how could this go wrong? Susan Crawford, another rising star in the domestic thriller arena. Pocket Wife was a library reads pick, and it gives us an ignored wife of a high-powered attorney who gets drunk with her friend one afternoon, passes out after an argument with said friend, and then wakes up to find the friend is dead. I know.
I will never do that to you, Katie.
What about me, though?
Look for The Other Widow, Susan Crawford's other book. It bows later this month, and that's a man breaks up with his mistress moments before their car skids off the road, killing him. So the mistress walks away and keeps her mouth shut because she doesn't want her own life to go up in flames. And then we have Wendy Walker, whose suburban domestic suspense, that's her hallmark. All her stories take place in affluent Connecticut communities. Everyone knows that the real wives of any suburb are far more sinister than those Bravo TV spouses. Far more. What do we have next? Oh, top 5 trends. Yes, get gone, girl. And keep going. Get thee gone, girl, almost. This trend is not showing any signs of slowing down. We have unreliable, unlikable, understandably off-kilter women. And on the surface, they may seem reprehensible, but the authors who are loving this trend want to show you what drove these would-be ladies Macbeth to their criminal decisions. They want you to understand they're crazy. And I kind of do, so maybe that makes me a little bit crazy too. We have The Luckiest Girl Alive, Reese Witherspoon's favorite book from last year. A successful magazine editor about to marry into a wealthy family feels her high school past creeping up on her and starts to crumble from the inside out. And you get to see that in Luckiest Girl Alive. Reese Witherspoon wants to turn that into a movie, and this is very cinematic, and wow, it packs quite a punch. And then The Passenger. People who don't read thrillers have read this novel and told me to read it. Remember the Spellmans, Lisa Lutz's fun and breezy family of investigators? This is not the same thing. So if you read Lisa Lutz because you liked the Spellmans, this is not why you want to pick up The Passenger. Pick up The Passenger because you like Lisa Lutz's pacing and storytelling. We have some 2 women, some crimes they're covering up, off-the-grid living, and the unsavory pasts of both that are steadily creeping up on them. Oh yes, Pretty Girls by Karen Slaughter. One of her standalones. She's always been a thriller favorite, and her second standalone will have the reader questioning which sister is telling the truth. The recently widowed one, the single mother, or the one who disappeared 20 years ago. Good Girl and Girl on the Train, unreliable female narrators with an agenda. I talked about Good Girl just a minute ago, and Girl on the Train, another one of the classics in the psychological, twisted women's psyche subgenre. Oh, Family Nightmare. This one I've been seeing a lot of. I included The Dinner here as part of Family Nightmare because it seems that there's no nightmare more terrifying than that of parents trying to understand what their children have done, are doing, or how they could have disappeared in a flash. So these books all center around families that are disintegrating because of something children have done. And in The Dinner, we have 2 couples who meet for dinner at a very fancy restaurant to ostensibly discuss the horrific crime their children have committed, but for which they have not yet been caught. And you don't know what it is the children have done till about 1/3 of the way into the book. You know they've done something terrible, you just have no idea what. The characters are not unreliable, but they are not likable. Be prepared for that. There are some readers that have to like their characters, have to identify with them in some way. With books like The Dinner, you should tell your readers, be prepared to not like everybody you're reading about. And the suspense in this book is in learning just how despicably inhuman everyone in this book is, including the waiters at the restaurant. There's nobody to like in this book. But that's what makes this book so much fun. There's nobody to like here. Girl in the Red Coat got a lot of buzz earlier this year. A mother's child disappears at a festival, and it's told in alternating viewpoints, the mother's and the kidnapped child's, but the reader won't know until the very end how it all turns out. And then I included Reconstructing Amelia, a working mom who gets a phone call from her daughter's school. Amelia has just committed suicide by jumping off the school's roof. And Kate, her mom, uses Amelia's phone, social media profiles, and conversations with her friends to prove that Amelia was murdered. This book also packs a big punch at the very end. Also good for book groups. The Widow by Fiona Barton. Young girl disappears, husband and wife turn on each other, journalist wants to get at the truth. Another suspenseful family drama, a little less psychological than Gone Girl or Girl on the Train, but family in peril. And then I included The Last Child by John Hart. This one was very popular a couple of years ago. 13-year-old boy who's searching for his twin sister who disappeared a a year previous. And Johnny's dogged search for his sister has readers aching in sympathy and turning the pages as Johnny starts to unearth the truth about his sister's disappearances and that of a recently snatched second girl in his neighborhood. So these kids are in danger, and the marriages, parents, and communities are on the brink because of it. What's the next trend? Oh yes, have passport, will thrill. Thrillers are going beyond the American borders. And I loved Zodiac Station simply because it's disaster at an Arctic research station. Can the reader believe the person who is telling the gruesome tale of what happened at Zodiac Station? And then Calvin's Head. Calvin is one of the most realistic and lovable literary dogs, right after Enzo from Art of Racing in the Rain. Unfortunately, Calvin and his homeless owner, Jason, have found a head floating in the pond of Vondelpark in Amsterdam. And Jason knows to whom the head belongs. This book has a great sense of place, using Amsterdam and gay culture as frames for a slowly building story. And as the reader starts to understand who all the characters are and their places in this story, you'll be zipping through the pages. I actually found this book in Amsterdam, and I finished reading it on my vacation, and it was just wonderful. I just wish that David Swatling's book was more readily available in the States. It's worth hunting down, which is why I included it here. And then The Martian, because hey, your typical survival thriller, snarky humor, hero with ingenuity and dedication, and it's set on Mars. So forget the science fiction stuff and focus on the thrills if you haven't read The Martian. Zip through real quick. Natsuo Karino's Out. This one is set in a Tokyo factory where a middle-aged woman strangles her husband and then gets her friends on the line to help her, or are they going to help her? And then Blackwater Rising. Houston in the 1980s. This one will bring back some racial clashes, union clashes, and political machinations for struggling African-American attorney Jay Porter. He rescues a drowning white woman who is in more danger than either of them realize. This is a legal political thriller. And then really quick, audio trends. This is what I'm seeing in thrillers now, audio originals. Audio is one of the fastest growing segments of format for the reading population, and thrillers in audio originals. We have Amuck, which is about a criminal psychologist who plans to take her life on the day that she's called to negotiate with a man who's taken a radio station hostage. Starling Project, which comes from Jeffrey Deaver, a regular thriller writer, and this is just this is a political thriller that's original just to audio, and it features Alfred Molina. And then Gunchurch. This is a really compelling thriller about a washed-up one-book wonder who's now teaching community college, and he faces down a potential shooter in his community college, and then after that, he's invited to join a special gun club. We have, Junkie Quatrain. Give this to all your Walking Dead people, Walking Dead readers. It's actually bioethics, medical ethics, and political ethics involving zombies and through wondering how they got that way. And then Missing or Murdered, an historical true crime thriller. Spinster New York attorney marries a man 10 years her junior, and then she disappears just before they go on their honeymoon. So that one's for you, Becky.
That sounds good.
Okay, really quick, some trends. Historical thrillers, you'll start to see a lot of mixing of the genres where you have a novel with a wonderful historical setting and then a mystery, some sort of suspense story, some sort of thrill that goes along with it. So Dark of the Island, set in pre-World War II off of Cape Hatteras. Northwater, set in Victorian times aboard a whaling ship that the captain has been bribed into shipwrecking for the insurance money. Memory Painter, a young couple who don't know each other share dreams and nightmares about paintings of scenes of past lives. And this one's a blend of neuroscience and the paranormal. And Dennis Lehane's Live by Night, gangsters in Jazz Age. Three Emperors, this is a thrilling yarn in the best sense. Michael Crichton's Pirate Latitudes meets the Flashman novels in the 7th entry in the Ethan Gage books. Throw in some of Christopher Moore's quippy humor. This is a really fun book, good to give to your series readers. Really quick, some of my favorites. Some Dead Genius, for the title alone, I love this book. I love it because it's about gangsters and art and dark humor. I love Head Games by Craig McDonald because it's an historical thriller and it's best enjoyed in audio. Tom Steckschulte is the narrator, and you'll never read these books again if you listen to them first. Night Film, because it's an illustrated novel of the history of the movie industry. Very enigmatic female character and a demanding storyline. This one requires the kind of concentration you probably needed for Night Circus or a John le Carré novel. And then Relative Danger, also fantastic in audio. A Canadian slacker hero finds himself in a bar with a rugby team representing all countries of the UK. New Zealand, Ireland, Scotland, Cornwall, Cockney, Leeds, Wales, and a pair of vacationing Texans, and a spoiled Egyptian heiress, and the Egyptian sidekick who likes to talk like John Wayne. Don't bother to read this. Listen to it. The narrator, Patrick Lawler, is fantastic. And then Death and Life of Bobby Z, because we have another slacker hero who finds himself in dire straits, but not so dangerous because he's been mistaken for the missing kingpin of a Mexican drug ring. And they share identical faces. So only good can come of that when you inherit a drug ring, right?
Only good.
I mean, what else do we have to inherit? So I think I have finished. I hope I went fast enough.
That's fine.
Oh my goodness.
That's fine.
Okay, it's my turn. And as you can see on there, I'm going to talk about horror. I want to give you the definition, which is from my, which if you go to the second link there, that's for the horror blog. That's really basically an update for the book. The book was written mostly in 2010, but it came out in 2012. That's how books go. But there's been an update constantly from 2010, actually, on that horror blog. Many of the authors I'm going to talk about today and/or books, there are reviews at that website. I'm also going to be talking about, from the trends, an article I just wrote from novelists. So I'll refer to that too, which you can pull up later. So that's what we're going to talk about today. But from that book, my book, the definition I have of horror is a story in which the author manipulates the reader's emotions by introducing situations in which unexplainable phenomena and unearthly creatures threaten the protagonist and provoke terror in the reader. Yes, I have to read my own words, sorry. But what I like to say better when I talk to librarians, and this is a perfect time to do it, because I've got this thing I like to push, which is called Halfway to Halloween, which is right around the corner, just a couple days. But it's a really good time before Halloween to start thinking about your horror books. I know some people were like, horror, it's April. But if you start thinking about it now, it's the right time. If you start learning like you are today, and all of you watching in the future, hopefully not too far in the future, because you want to be able to know the trends and the authors and all the things you should know about horror before you come to October and ask questions. And like Rebecca said, and every idea comes out of your head because every Stephen King book is out and you don't know what to do. So this is a really good time to start thinking about it. But when you're working with readers, I like to say, look, we're entering the world of horror fiction where monsters roam the streets and vampires attack at night and ghosts haunt every home and mayhem is the norm. That's what's happening. It's okay. Don't be scared. That's what's going to happen. If you know that ahead of time, you're going to be able to help the readers. Because horror readers want to be scared. Whether or not you want to be scared, they want to be scared. I get a lot of people like, but it's just too scary. There's a woman on the Adult Reading Roundtable steering committee with me. Her name's Stacy, and she's like, it's just too scary. And I said, that's okay. The people aren't scary. They're not monsters. They just want to read about them. That's what I always say. It's in the book. I'm quoting myself.
Except that guy that you had to call 911 on the other
Just
day.
the one time. No. But the point is, though, it's okay that they want to be scared. They don't expect you to necessarily like it too. But you need to understand that they're looking for books where the author produces feelings of fright. And it can be graphic violence, but can also be with psychologically unsettling situations. A lot of the authors Katie talked about really toe that line, and some of them I'll talk about too. I'm going to mention Gillian Flynn in my talk. And actually, when I met her one time, the first thing I said to her is like, oh, I said, you're in my book. This was before Gone Girl. You're in my book about not quite horror. She's like, exactly what I am. There's that line. And I think all three of these authors blend with each other. Because I'm going to mention science fiction too in horror. So I think it's important to understand. So there's different ways to produce fear. You don't have to only have blood and guts. And I will mention when some of the books are bloodier than others, so you can make a note, and you know that when you're talking to readers. But it's the emotional pull of the story that's really important. That trying to cause fear, that hitting in you in your gut. That's what horror readers want. That's what we want. We want to be scared. And horror authors imagine a speculative threat doing that. So unlike a serial killer, which Katie talked about, there's a monster that's not of this world that gets our pulse racing, that leaves us on our shoulders. Yes, there often happen to be very evil people in a lot of these books too, but that's not the main reason of the story. There is a monster also coming after people. And horror fans love that they believe in those monsters while they're reading the book, while their nose is in the book, but they're happy to leave them on the page when they close the book and return to the real world. So the fundamental feature in a horror novel, the books I'm going to talk about, is they have to terrify you as a reader, and do so pervasively with everything, with all your senses, with all your feeling that you are a little frightened after you close the book, but a few minutes later, hopefully it wears off. This unsettling feeling coupled with the speculative threat combines to pure terror, and that is the emotion we are looking for. So don't worry about it. It's okay. I'm not going to scare you. I promise. All right? So let's talk about some of these authors today. One of the things I do, one of the hardest things about me talking about horror is I feel like I have to pick my favorite child. And I only have 2 actual children, but when it comes to horror, thousands. And I've spent so many hours, and many times talking to myself, to them, about them, or writing about them, that I feel like I'm leaving something out. As Katie sort of alluded to that. So what I did was I said, we're going to do classic authors, but I'm not going to tell you about Bram Stoker. We're not going to do that. I did include one actual classic author, and there's a What I'm doing is talking to you about the authors that have now been considered the classics of modern horror. And many people, myself included, have argued that what we call modern horror began in 1972 with the publication of Carrie by Stephen King. So we're going to use that as our springboard point. So these are authors that plied their trade back then, mostly notable, in the 1970s, and became popular then and have stayed popular. And that's why you need to know them. So when I'm talking about them to you right now, I'm going to talk to you about why you need to know about them. And Stephen King is the obvious place to start. Please, I hope everybody here has read a Stephen King book before or seen a movie or something that's Stephen King. And I'm going to talk about problems with some movies too in a little bit. But Stephen King is really a great American storyteller. There's no doubt about it. One of my favorite books by Stephen King is not even a horror book. It's 11/22/63, and it's a science fiction, very scary thriller, alternate history about a man who time travels back to try to stop the Kennedy assassination. It is very long. It is also excellent on audio. I read a lot of books, especially a lot of scary books. The ending of this, there's a terrifying twist at the end, but the ending is just so beautiful. I actually was crying at the end of it. It's just one of the most beautiful books. I've heard other horror authors mention that it's one of the most beautiful books I've ever read too. So I'm not alone. But if you want to read just one book, and it's on your sheet, it's The Shining by Stephen King. His best book, almost everyone will tell you, is The Stand. You do not want to give that 1,500 pages to somebody and say, hey, here you go, Stephen King. The Shining is terrifying. The Shining has characters. It has a great movie, and the book is better. But it shows you everything that horror, the way it is now, that the trade is now applied, should be. It is a little dated when you read it. There is a sequel, Dr. Sleep, many years later, which I think is also good. The Shining's still better, but it's also very good. And it shows you Stephen King, why people fell in love with Stephen King. He now writes in every genre, though, especially in thrillers and mysteries. So you need to be aware that not every book he writes is horror. But lots of people read him who don't normally read horror, too. So that says something about the stories he can tell, but also about the pull of horror. So The Shining is a scary book. People like it. People who say they don't read horror have read it. It's important to remember that. Dean Koontz started about the same time, too, and started a little bit different. He was more science fiction thriller horror when he started. If you want to read one of those older titles, The Watchers is the one you should read. But the one I put on there is Odd Thomas, because I think that is currently showing you how Dean Koontz has changed over time and a trend in horror, and sort of this encompassing and bleed over into paranormal. And Odd Thomas is a series you all have it on your shelves, whether or not you've read it, that is a man who basically can speak with ghosts and doesn't know it and gets thrown into this whole world. It's heartwarming, but it's also scary. There are actual scary things. It's not as scary as The Shining, but it really has spoken to a lot of people also, and those are bestsellers. Again, people who say they don't read horror. So that would be to see it now, how he's evolved. Anne Rice, of course, there was a while there where you wouldn't want to put her on our list because she was writing fiction, but now she's back to writing horror stories. But it doesn't matter. You need to read Interview with a Vampire if you've never read it. That changed the way vampire stories were told. It also was the very beginning of things like making things like Sookie Stackhouse possible, and things like Sherilyn Kenyon's paranormal romances, because it took the story of a vampire and made the vampire relatable. I mean, you still know he's a monster, but there's a lot of people who swoon all over him in that book. And you see his side of the story and come to see why maybe the vampires are misunderstood. And it started this whole other way of looking at the story of horrific creatures that were traditionally just with the fangs out to get you. And it's really important to have read it to see how that has changed over time. H.P. Lovecraft is on here because, yes, he's old and he's dead. We're going to talk about him when we talk about trends. But if you don't know about Cthulhu or haven't heard of Lovecraft, it's showing up everywhere right now. There's a book that was in Booklist on the best historical fiction, which actually I have in my bag. It's called Lovecraft County. And it's, or it could be country, it's one of those. It's in my bag by Matt Ruff, and it is a great historical fiction book. One of the biggest reasons why Lovecraft was not talked about for many years is because he was an outright misogynist and racist. And one of the newest ways that he's being addressed is by women and writers of color. Matt Ruff is not a writer of color, but it's all about African Americans in Chicago. And it tells a Lovecraftian tale. And actually the main character, Atticus, is the heir to this crazy Lovecraftian cult. And everybody's super white, but he has to be because he's the one that's directly related to the leader. And it comes back to Chicago. It's really interesting. It tells like a traditional Lovecraft tale, but says, hey, it takes it on and says, you were a racist, Lovecraft, but we can tell this story with African Americans. And there are women doing that too now too. So it's a really big trend. But the fact of the matter is that authors are using Lovecraft. So we need to be aware of his stories. And I gave you just a collection, just any Cthulhu stories that you can find. Are important. And then Ramsey Campbell, just in case you're not aware of Ramsey Campbell, he is the British Stephen King. That's the best way to put it quickly. Nazareth Hill is one of his greatest books. It's older. You should have his books. They're readily available in America. They're great to give to anybody who likes mainstream horror stories. They're hardcover, so they're easy to get. Nazareth Hill is a ghost story, and it's definitely worth your time. If you have a problem with children in peril, maybe you stay away from horror, but specifically Nazareth Hill is an intense child in peril. He also, in other books, started a trend, which I took off the trends now, but is a trend in my book, that the protagonists are no longer safe in horror, which is sort of this ratcheting up of the danger that's in all books now. And that's important, I think, to note, too, that he started that trend. So he's an author you should have in your collections. All of his books, when they come out, are excellent to give to people who like mainstream horror. And then 5 must-read books. And I did, again, to understand 21st century horror. So this is even taking a step forward. Why, not just back to 1972, but what people today, why they read horror. Because it's different. It changes over time. So The Rising is on here by Brian Keene. So many people say this, including Brian Keene himself and the people who did The Walking Dead. But The Rising, The Walking Dead first graphic novel, and the movie 28 Days Later all came out within a few weeks of each other. A few months, I think, maybe 3 months. And all 3 of them are credited with starting the new rise in the zombies and the way the zombie story is told. And The Rising, Brian Keene has gone on, that was one of his first books. He's gone on to now become a horror grandmaster, a world horror grandmaster, and we'll talk about him in a little bit because he's leading the charge on new authors. He calls himself more like the grandfather of the genre now, even though he's not that old. But The Rising is a zombie tale that you will recognize. It is what started all the tales you read now, all the TV shows, everything. There is some controversy about the ending. Many people say it doesn't really have an ending. There's a current horror author who's did a fake Kickstarter to pay Brian Keene to write an ending to it. And Brian Keene thinks it's hilarious. It's a friend of his. But you need to read this. If you've read The Walking Dead because you want to understand, you need to read and most libraries have it, although one of the small problems with The Rising is it was part of, and I'll talk about this a little later with trends, when Leisure Books, which was the largest horror publisher, shut down. It was stuck in that, but Brian got all his rights back, so you can still get it. It's just a little bit harder. At my library where I used to work, we had the really old Leisure paperbacks, and they still go out. Victor LaValle is an African-American horror writer. The reason he's on here, his brand new novella is really popular right now. The Ballad of Black Tom also takes a Lovecraftian tale and sets it in 1920s jazz age in New York City and tells the story. Again, he's like, basically gives the middle finger to Lovecraft and says, I'm gonna tell a story of black people. It would be bad, but it's a great story to tell. But The Devil in Silver won a bunch of awards. Why he's on here is 2 reasons. Literary horror is a big trend, which I didn't list as a trend, so this is my way to sneak it in. And he has won prestigious literary awards, including one of the PEN awards that they give out. Amazing writer. The Devil in Silver is also horror story. There's a lot more of those. It used to be you'd have to tell the story in an abandoned field somewhere in a haunted house that no one can get to. No, this is told right in New York City. He tells all his stories right in New York City. It's also told in an insane asylum. And it's got a great, there are the monsters in your head versus the monsters that are real. There's actually a picture. That's the paperback, and that's a picture of the monster that appears. It is a wonderful story. It is complex. If you don't think you like horror, you're like, oh, I'm more literary than that. You read this book and then tell me you don't like horror, because it's a really great story. John dies at the end. This is a great book. You like this book. David Wong is not the real name. John does die at the end. There are spiders in this book is another one. Again, these are books you should have at the library. They got a lot of critical acclaim. So comic horror, it started with those mashups like Pride and Prejudice and Zombies, and then it went a little too far out of control because there was just too many of them. But David Wong has been there the whole time to keep writing satirical horror books. So they are funny, but they are about making fun of the genre, using the genre in a way that's endearing. It is not like picking on it. And if you have somebody who thinks they've read everything in horror and I've read everything you have, and they haven't read David Wong, this is a book. Don Dies at the End is a great story to give them. It's very snarky. Great for younger people. Later, I'm gonna have a trend about women in horror, which is a big trend, but by Sarah Langan, again, is an older title. Every book she's written, and she hasn't written many recently, she's been doing more novellas and short stories, is a wonderful story to read. But if you want to understand the current trend of women horror writers, The Keeper, and then there's another one after called The Missing. And these are a little more traditional, set in sort of abandoned towns. Involves like going on a field trip and discovering something horrific. The Keeper is great, but Sarah Langan is a wonderful author. They are slightly gory, but not as much as some of the other authors. Not like Brian Keene. He has been described as a master at describing dismembered bodies. So Sarah Langan, a little more discreet, but still terrifying. And I never know, is it Dan Simons or Dan Simmons?
It's Simmons.
I think it's Simmons too, but someone said Simons the other day. Dan Simmons is an author I know you know about. He's an author that you have on your shelves. He has started a trend, and Katie sort of referred to this too, the historical, the traveling. So he takes horror stories. He used to write more traditional horror, which are still fantastic and you should give out. Winter Haunting is great. But The Terror is the first one in his very popular best-selling series where he takes something true and adds a horrific element. So in this case, it's the Franklin expedition to do the Northwest Passage because, well, they all disappeared. We don't know what happened. They're all dead. We know this. It's been, over 100, almost 200 years, maybe. So they've all died. Why? Well, he says, well, a monster ate them, and he tells the story. He tells it much not as funny as that. My favorite by him is Drood, but I would not just hand that to anyone, and that's great on audio. That's also like a doorstop. And that one tells the story of Dickens writing his final book, The Mystery of Edwin Drood, that never got finished, but has Wilkie Collins as the narrator. And Wilkie Collins is, we all know he probably did drugs. Well, he is way gone in this book. And there's possibly a doppelganger Wilkie Collins who's out there doing nefarious things, or maybe it's him, and it's very, very spooky and very atmospheric and set, very good setting. Again, the history is right on. I don't give that to people first, though. This one, The Terror, is a little bit more of a straight bridge from horror to historical fiction. It's much more of a clear mashup, but a book you must know about because that is a popular trend. Okay, so now I'm going to talk about 5 up-and-coming authors. Ooh, got switched around. Or did I just skip? Maybe not. I'll just look at the screen. Oh, there we go. Okay. So in my book, I list Joe Hill and Jonathan Mayberry as the 2 up-and-coming authors. And I feel like they're not up-and-coming anymore because they're both New York Times best-selling authors. However, I do want to mention them here because there was nowhere else to mention them. Funny story about Booklist and Joe Hill, so we can share that. So Joe Hill is Stephen King's son, if you don't know that, and don't hold it against him, whether or not you like him. He is fantastic. I think he's better, but maybe that's because we're like, Joe Hill and I are like the same age, so we have more in common. He broke on with Heart-Shaped Box, which told the story of basically an aging rock star bought a ghost over the internet. And it turned out that he was meant to buy that ghost because that ghost specifically wants to haunt him. It is terrifying, and it is short and it is quick. His books have gotten much longer. Nosferatu, which will be mentioned later on the sheet, is my probably favorite, or maybe tied as my second favorite horror book that I've ever read. It is long, but here's why it's fantastic. Oh, and it's spelled, it's on your sheet later when I talk about my 5 favorites, but NOS4A2, like a license plate. The 2 main characters, the good guy is a woman named Victoria who goes by Vic, and the bad guy is Charlie Manx. Charlie make Christmas the scariest thing you've ever seen. I am not kidding you. So that in and of itself is fantastic. Charlie Manx collects children and basically takes their souls and puts them in this Christmas land. And Vic is the one sort of that got away that he hasn't gotten. He's trying to get her even though she's grown up, and she's been because of it. There's a fantastic librarian character in here who lives in Iowa, who wears Scrabble-like jewelry. You'll love her. But here's why Nosferatu is one of the best books I've ever read. It has the greatest ending of any book ever. The ending is so great that in The Ocean at the End of the Lane, Neil Gaiman in the acknowledgments thanks Joe Hill and makes a comment about how he can never do what Joe Hill did, and he's ruined it for all of us, and I'll tell you what he did. The book ends on the last page of the story, and then you go on to read the acknowledgments, and then you go on to keep reading, and the notes on the type is where the story actually finishes. And if you don't read the story through to the notes on the type, you will not have the same book. So I mentioned this in my review on my blog, and Rebecca called me the next day. She said, everyone at Booklist wants to know what you're talking about. We only had the arc, and we have no idea. And they had to hunt down the final pages. Because when you have the arc, you don't get the notes on the type.
Acknowledgments.
So now I'm worried, because I reviewed The Fireman, which was in Booklist, and I gave it a starred review, his brand new book, and I didn't get the notes on type. So I hope the book, I have to go find it when it comes out for real in a couple weeks. But again, The Fireman, his new one, is very thick too, and I'll talk about that when I talk about trends. This is really great. He's an author you need to watch. He writes slowly though. He's not his father, so it will take time because he's also writing graphic novels and doing things for other things. Jonathan Mayberry is completely different than Joe Hill in that he writes a lot of short books. Now, what you probably know him best for are two things: his scientific thrillers, his horror thrillers with Joe Ledger, which are New York Times bestsellers in paperback, starting with Patient Zero, and also his young adult series Rotten Ruin, which is really the start with right now I give people for zombie stories, because no matter what your tolerance is at the young adult level, if you don't want a lot of gore, because he has some adult adult zombie novels that are really gory and scary. But what he does really well with those books is he tells a really moving coming-of-age zombie story with all the great zombie stuff too. Rotten Ruin is also, it's a long series now, and all of them have won awards. You can read just the first one. It has a beautiful, moving ending. Actually, one of the best zombie book endings I've ever read. And there are some unresolved things that if you care, you can keep reading, but you don't have to understand. He started as, originally, he was a martial arts instructor, so he sometimes puts martial arts into his stories, and that's really interesting to some readers. He also has written a lot of nonfiction about paranormal stuff, and he's written a lot of novelizations, like for Wolfman movie and things like that, and comic books. So he's done a lot of that. So that's an author you need to know about. Sarah Pineborough is an author that was around back in the early 2000s writing pulp horror by a woman. She's British. And then she took a break from that to write for some of the Doctor Who properties, not Doctor Who, but like Torchwood and the other one, the Sarah Jane Chronicles. They were really popular in Britain and at my house on BBC. So she wrote for those. Well, recently she's come back. Quite a lot of books that are getting a lot of attention. Again, all ages. She's writing for teens, she's writing middle grade, and she's writing adult. The ones you guys might know about is her historical horror mysteries set in Victorian London. Mayhem is one of them, is the first one. But she just got a huge contract from her publisher, and they're going all out on her, so she's in. Jonathan Janz is a newer pulp horror writer who I gave a star review to one of his books, The Children of the Dark, in March in Booklist, maybe April. And he is going back old school, but they don't feel old. His newest book's The Children of the Dark. It's on Sinister Grin Press, which you can get for libraries. It's small, but not that small. Is like Stand By Me by Stephen King meets Something Wicked This Way Comes by Ray Bradbury. It is a great coming-of-age horror story. I mean, the first line is like, the summer when I was 15, I watched 14 of people I know in my town die. And then he goes and starts, he's at a baseball game and he's telling a story. You're like, what's gonna happen? And there's ancient evil monsters, and there's a really great serial killer. So if you have serial killer crossover, and a good open horror ending that's resolved but open. And then the star name that I hope everybody heard about last year was Paul Tremblay with Head Full of Ghosts. His new one, The Disappearance of Devil Rock, is coming out in, and I believe the review's already in Booklist, and I know it got a good review. They're totally different books. The great thing about A Head Full of Ghosts, though, is it's like an homage to every horror story that was ever told before. There's references to The Exorcist. It involves a possession. The other great thing about it is it tells the story in such an interesting way. It's a family who the teenage daughter is possessed, possibly, maybe she's faking it, maybe she's not possessed. But it's told through the younger sister, and it's told as flashbacks, but they were on a reality TV show to show the exorcism, supposedly. And so the sister, she's telling the story, but we're also seeing what it was like when they were filming the story, and you just don't know what is real and what isn't real. Disappearance at Devil Rock involves the disappearance of some children. So he's putting children in peril is the only similar thing. He writes very well. He's well regarded. He is a judge for the Shirley Jackson Awards, which is a really big award that comes out for books basically that are like Shirley Jackson. It's sort of like American's Clark Award. Like, you can't really describe it except the Eggers give it out, I think, too, or somebody big gives it out. Anyway, that's Paul Tremblay. You should know him right now. Okay, let me talk about some trends. So as I mentioned before, I just wrote a brand new article on horror trends, and I'm going to talk about lots of the resources you can get on Novelist after Rebecca goes. But I did do a full brand new horror trends that's either up now or going up any day on Novelist. And this is a sampling of it. So I'm going to mention some authors who aren't on the screen, but they'll be on Novelist, so you can pull it up that way. So while certain subgenres of horror like zombies and ghost stories remain strong, that is true, there is an emerging category that's garnering a lot of attention. And it sort of harkens back to the past. When you say things like weird fiction, people think about H.P. Lovecraft and Weird Tales, the publication he originally wrote for. And back then, it meant the term was first used to describe a new type of scary story, which blended occult, I want to get all these, supernatural, mythical, and even scientific elements. And so that's why I put Lovecraft in there before, of classic authors you need to know, because it sort of all stems off of the new weird fiction revival, stems off of that back in the late 19th century, early 20th century. But today, it's best seen by the work of Jeff Vandermeer, both in his compilation from 2012 called The Weird, a compendium of strange and dark stories, and it included people you would know that you wouldn't have trouble classifying, like China Miéville or Neil Gaiman, those people. So that's kind of what we're talking about. But his enormously popular Southern Reach trilogy. I don't know if they knew what they were doing when they released this in 2014. So it's 3 paperback books. Now you can buy them as one, and they were released a few months apart. And they are linked, but you can read just one or the other. But basically, or all 3, basically it all follows this Area X, which is in far southern Florida, far southern United States. And we're in the future, a near future, and this area has sort of been closed off, and it's got something's not going right that doesn't follow the laws of nature. And they keep sending explorers in there, and either they end up all dying, or they come back and they're like taken out of society. They can't function. And so this is 3 different ways to look at Area X: annihilation, authority, and acceptance. If you are expecting a straight narrative, you will not get that. Resolution, if you're expecting full understanding, you will not get that. You're reading it for the atmosphere, for the scares, for the thoughts that it's bringing up, for the ideas. So you can read them all I read Annihilation on a plane ride to Hawaii. Like, you could read them that fast, and they are in paperback. Again, you can buy all 3 together now. They were a huge runaway success. The Annihilation was in the 20-minute books, which is a really prestigious thing that the Morning News runs every year in March. And it did really well. People were shocked at how great it was. They were like, oh, it's a genre book. It's so good. Because it is. It's okay. And Kelly Link's another name you might know. She was this is Pretty Monsters, but Get in Trouble was just shortlisted for the Pulitzer Prize. So, this is an author you need to know. And she writes stories that are unclassifiable. Other authors and names that, again, will be in the article but are not on your sheet are Stephen Graham Jones, who is an up-and-comer, who has a novel coming out in a few months that is going to be well received. And then a little bit more on the kind of bizarro side of this trend with a little more graphic violence is Laird Barron, is another author. So there are those. Next trend. Science fiction and horror team up. So you talked a little bit about science, out to get you. She's going to do science fiction. One of the very interesting things about horror, and one of the biggest trends that I have seen in the 21st century, the fact that it used to be that you had to have the horror come from a fantasy element. So it had to be like, a monster. Well, we all watch The Walking Dead, right? I mean, it's enormously popular. That is scientific, how the zombie virus came up. We don't really know everything, but it's a virus. It's infecting people. When I first would start talking about books like The Passage, where there's a scientific explanation for why there is a horrific thing happening in monsters, Joyce Eric said to me, you can't do that. My son likes horror, and he says, no, it has to be fantasy. And I said, I don't know, I think it's changing. And it is, because she gave him The Passage, and he read it, and he was like, it's okay. So, but everybody's doing it now. And I mentioned I was going to say Joe Hill's new book, The Fireman, again. His new book, The Fireman, is based on the idea, it's sort of a twist on the post-apocalyptic tale. There is a fungus that's infected everybody, and that fungus makes people spontaneously combust. But some people are trying to learn to live symbiotically with the fungus. And there's like large portions of the book that describe the, I never say it right, like the mycobiology, whatever it is, the study of funguses. It starts with an M. I think so, yeah. Is it mycology? Okay, so mycology and how this could actually happen and how this has happened possibly in the past and how funguses can survive in the Arctic and now it's melting. So there is a scientific explanation, which is very interesting. I think it has to do with the fact that horror authors, people have been there, done that, and sometimes real life things are a lot more scary. And so this is a way to creep that in. So The Passage, and then The 12, and the brand new one, The City of Mirrors, which Rebecca just told me my review will be in Booklist in the next issue. Mm-hmm. So it's done. The trilogy is now done. That has a complete scientific background. And the book goes back to explain even more detail how the virus that created these they're like vampire zombie hybrid type things, because they can be sort of mind controlled, or they can mind control people. But they're like vampires mostly. Were created. The Strain is a great example by Guillermo del Toro. That one is much more scientific. You wouldn't normally call that horror because it's very biomedical thriller, but they're definitely scary. So that is something I think that is being allowed now. But in terms of some newer authors that maybe you don't know about, David Wellington and Scott Sigler are two authors that write a lot of these books, again, should be in public libraries. And they've amassed a large following, mostly starting by writing their books either online or not so much self-publishing, because they're all published by main publishers, but releasing things early and using technology to tell their stories. And they use them as the base of their terrifying novels. Monster Island is a trilogy with a zombie trilogy on New York City, as you can see the Statue of Liberty in the background. Okay, so then we have Horrific Women. And I turned my page too soon. I mentioned that would be a trend before. And there's an older Sarah Pineborough tale, but she is writing a lot of great books right now, and you just need to make sure you know it. But one of the reasons that I found that women, I wanted to talk about this as a trend, has to do a little bit with Gone Girl. So women horror writers have often found themselves in the shadows of the genre in general, but with an increasing and more intense variety of that female-driven psychological suspense. Both readers are looking for more, both men and women, and writers are looking to try it out too because, well, it sells, so I should try this. And publishers are trying to find it. So what's happening is, until those books catch up, and I think Katie gave you a lot of good ones to start with, some people have been going back to horror authors to try to find that sort of same psychological drive with female-centric. Tana, I never say her name right, Tananarive, she's fantastic. She's an African-American writer. She also writes mysteries. My Soul to Take is scary. It's got an ancient evil. This person's lived for all these generations, and libraries have it because it won a lot of awards when it came out. She's still writing and is a big voice in this women horror writers. But like I said, Sarah Pineborough is the name you want to know today. Also, publishers have been catching on, so there's some newer voices. These will be in my article because I didn't want to throw too many at you. But Alison Littlewood, Kelly Owen, Ania Alborn, she writes for that 47, the one that's Amazon.
47 North.
47 North. See, the magazine lady knows. And then Amy Lukovics, who is writing teen. She's fantastic. She's a really nice lady, too. She writes for Harlequin for their horror line. And I featured her book in a different publication earlier this year. And it's Devils Unto Daughters. And it's scary for adults, too. It's like if Little House on the Prairie had a hatchet. So it's pretty great.
Little Hatchet on the Prairie.
Yeah, she's great. She's got BEA if anyone's going. And she's got a new book that's coming out. And I would just order it now because she's fantastic. And I'm glad that she got. And she's adorable with her little glasses and her, she's tiny. And I love it because people always say, how do you like horror? You don't look scary. But okay, return to a pulp sensibility is another trend. I have an old author and a newer, and an author currently writing. So what happened was, for a while, the paperback was dying in horror because leisure books closed. This was in the early 2000s, and everything was going to ebooks. But then they realized people didn't really like ebooks, and they were losing readers. And so we're coming back to this pulp sensibility with these great paperback, writing that traditional pulp fiction like a Richard Lehman, who you still have his books at your libraries. Brian Keene actually has a book called Castaways, which is my favorite Brian Keene book, which is a tribute to Lehman. But it is really, really disgusting and gory. Don't give this to someone who doesn't like sexually graphic and violence, violence. So, but if you like the TV show Survivor, it totally makes fun of that TV show, which is really because they're castaways on the show Castaway, and they actually do have to survive for their life. So it's pretty great. Urban Gothic's a great one by Brian Keene too. But he is now promoting lots of these other authors, and he's out there with a podcast, and other authors are doing this and really trying to push these new voices. And they are being published in paperback, and they're able for you to get at libraries. Publishers like Journal Stone, Sinister Grin will sell to libraries. I have a whole bunch of them listed on my blog, so you can look at those. And then horror on audio, I think we all maybe have a trend about audio. Ghost Radio is one of my favorite books. I saw it was one of Katie's favorites from last time, and I had to keep it on. It is about a radio show. I'm not going to go into detail. Best listened to. It is available on Swan for those of you who are right here. And then Joe Hill, again, I have to talk about him. But Lock and Key is a graphic novel. It is one of the best graphic novel series ever done. It is complete, horror or not horror. It's one of the best horror stories ever done. This book was nominated for, I stopped counting how many Audies that are coming out this year in a couple weeks here in Chicago, right before BEA. They did an amazing job. Graphic novels on audio are a big trend anyway, but horror on audio, horror's great on audio because it's like telling old campfire stories. It's always worked well. You can find old radio shows, you can find all the classic authors, but now they're starting to do things like Lock and Key. I listened to part of this graphic novel. It is like a 6-book series. They describe the pictures, it's full cast. I mean, it was nominated literally for 6 or 7 Audie Awards, so it's a good job. So you should take a look at that. Okay, then my favorites. So, okay, remember when I said Nosferatu is probably my favorite horror book? So The Ruins is probably the one that would fight that out for it. Okay, do not watch the movie. The movie's terrible. If you've seen the movie, strike it from your brain. It's not even close to as good. Scott Smith is not a normal horror author. And I put a couple of those like that on here purposefully. The Ruins is set in Cancun, two couples on vacation, another tourist from another country, I think he's Greek or can't remember now, comes and finds that my brother's missing. He went into the forest, he couldn't come back, help me find him. Okay, what could go wrong? And they go into the forest and they see this giant hill and he's like, I think he went that way. And all the Mayans are like, don't go on the hill, but they don't speak English and they're telling them not to. Well, they go on the hill. On the hill lives this plant. This plant has a 100% success rate against human beings. What follows is a great horror story, and I think it has a great ending. Other people don't like it. The movie ruins it because it's not a good ending in the movie. But I want to stress that this plant has a 100% success rate against humans. So it's a great book. It's very psychological. It's kind of gory. Yes, a plant can kill people in a gory way. It's a great book. You will have it at your libraries because he's considered literary, so you will have it. House of Leaves is also another literary book. This book is scary. I don't own very many books. Being working in a library, I tend to just give them back to the library and take them when I want. I own this book. This book is literary, extremely literary, yes, but it is one of the scariest haunted house stories I've ever read. What is so scary about it, and it was one of the first books to do this, you physically have to turn the book to read it. Some pages just have one word. Some have different fonts. Sometimes you have to go forward and then back. The book tells you how to do it. That is unsettling in and of itself. So the experience of reading the book is as unsettling as the story, and definitely worth your time. If you knew me last year, I told you to read Bird Box. I did. I told you to read Bird. I told you. So if you haven't read Bird Box, it's because I haven't spoken to you in a year, or you don't read my blog, or you don't listen. Josh Mallerman. It was a first book. It was a debut novel. Again, I read a lot of horror stories. It takes a lot to impress me. This book was fantastic. Post-apocalyptic story. Opposite of The Ruins, not really a lot of blood. There's one fairly bloody scene, but one narrator, 2 different time frames. She wakes up, realizes she's pregnant one morning, and then this post-apocalyptic event starts happening, or apocalyptic event. And then the story also flashes forward to 4 years later, 4 or 5 years later, where she is living in a house where there's no one left and there's 2 5-year-old children. What is this apocalyptic event? We don't know, because if you open your eyes, you die. Basically, everyone who has seen whatever it is that's killed everything has gone crazy, tried to kill lots of people, and then killed themselves. So if you keep your eyes closed, everything's fine. Can you imagine living in a world of keeping your eyes closed? So we see this building up in the one-story frame, same narrator, and then we see her in the future trying to get these children she has raised to never open their eyes, who are very good with everything else, all their other senses, to get on a boat and go downriver to possible salvation. It is scary. The Reapers Are the Angels is a Southern Gothic. It is by Alden Bell. It is good for teens, but it's not really a straight-out horror book. I wouldn't even classify it that. It's much more psychological suspense with a little bit of a thriller, because the zombies are there, and they're well described, but she's actually being chased by a guy who's out to kill her. And she's only ever really lived in this world, so she just knows how to survive. It's a really interesting way to look. And she's all by herself, teenage girl. And then I just put Shirley Jackson. Because anything that woman writes is worth your time, and you should be reading it. They've re-released stuff. There was a news stories that were found. If you haven't read The Lottery in a while, which isn't technically a horror story, or you never read it, be like, oh, this is where the Hunger Games came from. It wasn't that new and unique. No, it's just the way she can write and the precision with words. And as I mentioned before, the other reason she's there is there's an entire award named after her because what she does. Her most traditional horror story is pure psychological horror, is The Haunting of Hill House. It's been made into numerous movies. It is the source material for many a horror author. So it is definitely a book. You need to know Shirley Jackson, and I love her. So I think that's it, right?
All right. So on to science fiction. So really briefly, science fiction, the way that you could tell something was science fiction instead of fantasy, instead of something else, was that science fiction, there are robots on the cover, or aliens, but robots, rivets, etc. Fantasy, that's where the dragons were on the cover. But then what about the Anne McCafferty Perth series? Those are robotic dragons. Where do you put those?
In space.
Right, in space. So you can't, science fiction, I actually really prefer the term speculative fiction that more and more librarians are using because it encompasses, it doesn't matter if they're dragons in space. They can be it's all encompassing. So as you'll see as I go through some of the titles here, we've also, some of the zombie novels fit here as well, also with horror, but usually the ones that take place in the future, or if there's a mistake because of science or technology, that fits into science fiction too. So I'm scooting a little bit of them in that way. And then I also have some thrillers. So you see a lot of crossover in all of these genres. So to get right into it, 5 classic authors to know in science fiction. I've got Philip because he's futuristic tales, highly imaginative. Isaac Asimov, that classic hard science, there's your robots, there's your planets, there's your stuff like that. Same thing with Arthur C. Clarke, very hard science when we talk about science fiction. Ray Bradbury, again, imaginative, also elemental fantasy. A lot of his short stories, though, take place on Mars or on other planets. These are good things to give people who think they don't like science fiction, and then they're like, oh yeah, but there's that Ray Bradbury short story I really like. Boom, you like science fiction. And then I put Kim Stanley Robinson on the list too. His books tend to be more on the literary side. They're huge, often political themes. So that's kind of just a good sort of classic science fiction authors to know about. Moving into must-read books. I actually did a twist on this. Rather than give you 5 books you should read, I'm going to tell you should pick up some anthologies and read 5 stories out of them. That puts you up to speed sooner than reading a giant 800-page space novel or space opera, as they call them, is going to help you out. Definitely pick some short stories. Masterpieces, the best science fiction of the century, edited by Orson Scott Card. I bet you've already all got in your libraries. And then this summer,
Jeff Vandermeer.
Yes, by Jeff Vandermeer and his The Big Book of Science Fiction, that's coming out this July 2016. It's a giant anthology of science fiction. And so I guarantee you, if you read 5 stories out of that rather than 5 books, that will get you up to speed on science fiction. Nice, quick, and easy. Science fiction up-and-comers. I've got Daniel O'Malley. His newest book is, and it's a blend of science fiction and supernatural fantasy. Dexter Palmer, his latest, Version Control, is a mind-bending look at science in the near future with themes of time travel and robotics. Holly Jennings' debut novel, Arena, takes place in the year 2054, where video game technology has advanced into fully immersive virtual sports. It is full of action-packed battle scenes, all kinds of thrilling sequences. Steve Tatangi, I'm gonna guess. Steve Tatangi's debut, Join, just came out this spring. Join explores the concept of living through multiple bodies and what it means to be a human. It's in the future, environmental catastrophes have decimated much of Earth, but new technology offers the means for individuals to join together and merge into a group mind. So in essence, it's how to attain immortality as your brain continues on even when your body is not here. Speculative science fiction. And then Elizabeth Bonesteel, her debut, The Cold Between, is a work of far future military science fiction with plenty of action, a little bit of mystery, and a strong female lead. And we're going to see that coming up in our trends for science fiction. The first trend I've got is techno geeks. So this is books involving video gamers, hackers. Basically, the future is now. This is another one of those trends that appeals to people who don't think that they like science fiction, but then you give them something like, you know, Ready Player One or Armada by Ernest Cline, and they're like, that was so cool. And it's, hey, science fiction. So Cory Doctorow, author John Scalzi, Ernest Cline, lots of crazy new technology in these books, some that actually exists today, some that's going to exist shortly. There are often political and or social themes in these as well, which appeals to a very certain group of readers. The next trend is diversity. Finally, some women in the science fiction realm. We're seeing a lot of that lately. We're also seeing a lot of different ethnicities represented. Everyone is equal in space, right? Hopefully, and who knows? So we're seeing a lot of diversity. I've got just some representative authors there. It's the end of the world as we know it, and I don't feel fine. I'm fairly convinced, if you knew anything about me, I'm fairly convinced that the world might just end in my lifetime. Jeez. So I like to read all the zombie books because I want to know how it's going to happen. I often find myself gravitating towards that, and not so much for the horror element, but for the scientific, technological. How is this going to happen? What are the signs I have to look for? What's going to happen afterwards? Like, how am I going to survive? So I've read all the stuff, so I'm fully prepared. So come to my house. So a lot of that is it's zombie stuff, cyberpunk. The future looks grim. None of this is happy books. These are all grim, hard science. Another trend we have is young adult science fiction. So of course, teens, very interested in dystopia because life sucks, right? Don't you know that? And the thing that I can't figure out about this is why they all have to be trilogies. Like, it's a thing. It's like this thing for teens. So Hunger Games, of course, is what really kicked this off. They're all futuristic novels. It's all teens under pressure. The teens get to be the heroes and the rock stars. So we've got some representative titles there. The Matched series by Ali Condi and Juliana Baggett's Pure trilogy. And then the last trend is genre blending science fiction with thrillers. The future is now, and it's really fast-paced. So Directive 51 by John Barnes is there. A new one, The Regional Office is Under Attack by Manuel Gonzalez. And then the middle one there, Dark Matter by Blake Crouch. That actually comes out in August of 2016. I just gave it a starred review in the May 1st issue of Booklist. It is the story, it's set in Chicago, which is really kind of cool. And it's the story of a science professor who gave up his career 15 years ago in order to get married to his pregnant girlfriend. And when he retired from science, he was working, retired from science, that's what a stupid thing to say. I retired from science in 2000. Well, he retired from the scientific world. He was working on a box that was basically allowed time travel. So the past catches up with him, or perhaps it's the future catching up with him. And it's a very, very fast-paced, thrill-a-minute book. I read it in less than 6 hours, and it's not short. So this is a big trend, is having kind of, is it science fiction? Is it a thriller? We put it in the thriller category, but I'm like, dude, it's time travel, that's science fiction. So this very, very genre blending, genre bending type books. So that's a trend. And then 5 of my favorites for science fiction. I am actually not much of a big science fiction reader. So mine are kind of interesting and definitely speculative. The one on here that is classic, alien science fiction is Ender's Game by Orson Scott Card. I think this is a very easy entree into the science fiction world for people who don't think they like stuff that takes place in the future or on different planets or military science fiction. It's easy to digest. It's a YA novel. It's video game-ish. We've got our very young protagonist who is being trained from childhood to fight an alien race via video games, and then realizes they've been doing it for real. So it's kind of cool. It's a good way to get into science fiction if you're not used to it. It's a gentle entry. The Girl with All the Gifts by M.R. Carey. This is the best zombie novel I have ever read, and like I said, I've read them all. It's very realistic. There is, today, right now, in real life, there is a fungus that attaches itself to ants. I believe they're ants. Yeah, Becky, do you know this, right? Ants. And it infects their brains and causes them to march uphill or up trees or up high things to jump to their death in order to spread more of the fungus. And in this zombie novel, that fungus has transferred over into humans. So I'm like, dude, this is so totally gonna happen. I'm like, headlines that say like massive ant die-off population, then we're goners. So that's what happens, and it's got a science fiction bend to it though, because the bulk of the story takes place on a military base. There's a lot of science going on. It was so well written, very cinematic, very action thriller oriented. If you don't think you like zombie novels, you might want to try this, and I bet you will like it. The next one is When She Woke by Hilary Jordan. I know you like this book, yeah. So this is in the future, prisons are full, and the nation has turned extremely socially conservative. And people who commit crimes, they don't have room for them in prison, so you are color-coded. So you are injected with a substance that changes the color of your skin, so anyone who sees you can tell that you are a criminal and what you've done. So our protagonist here wakes up in a lab, and her skin is bright red, which is the color of murderers. So it's a fascinating political, social commentary, full of science, but easy science to get into. Again, a frighteningly possible future, which is just very well done. A little bit on the literary side, so it's very good book. The Lathe of Heaven is my one kind of classic nod there, by Ursula. And this is set in a grim future where a young man can change reality with his dreams. So he has been fighting this his whole life because he doesn't want to change reality. He wants things to stay the way they are. And when scientists discover that he has this power, of course, they try and turn it and use it to their own ends. So that is a very interesting classic science fiction story. And also with classics, I put anything by Philip K. Dick on there. I happen to really like short stories in general. To me, short science fiction, I think I've said, it's easy to digest, it's easy to kind of wrap your head around, and I like just the imagination here. Surely you've heard of the movies if you haven't seen them or read the books. Blade Runner, Total Recall, Minority Report, Man in the High Castle, and about 100 more. So anything by Philip K. Dick. So that's my quick and easy science fiction introduction. And so Becky's going to talk a little bit about using novelists. I think we forgot to mention at the beginning that this series of Reader's Advisory events, graciously hosted by Rails, is sponsored by Novelist and by Booklist. And so we want to give a little plug as to how you can use those resources to find out more about genres. So
Yeah,
Becky,
and I mentioned the article I wrote for Novelist, and we're going to talk about a couple things for just a minute or two. But the first thing I want to make a general statement to all people who work with readers. I feel like when we help leisure readers, we feel like we're not allowed to use resources to help us. That we're supposed to know about all the books and just be able to be like, oh, well, that's this book, even though there's way more books than we can know. So if someone came to your desk and you're working at the reference desk and asked you a question about religion, you would use one of the religion encyclopedias or one of your databases to answer that question. And you would feel like you should. You should feel like, no, I can't just answer that. That's a personal question, and I need to use a resource. But how come when someone comes to your desk and says they like to read science fiction, and you don't read science fiction, you think, well, I can't help you. You can. And I think that's something that we're just trying to get over the hurdle of as we help leisure readers in libraries. And I feel like children's librarians have been able to do that for a while, but we're talking about working with adult readers. And I just want to say to everybody, let yourself use a resource. And there are plenty of them, and it's okay. And there are trusted people writing those resources. I mean, Katie and I both write for Booklist, and I write for Novelist, and it's okay. Trust me, we know what we're talking about. And you can give your input, which is the great thing about novelists specifically. If you don't like something you see, there's a thumbs up or a thumbs down. Please use it. They really love for you to do that. I've done it. I'm like, no, that does not work. That read alike is wrong, because some of them are computer-based. And you can tell they're signed by a person if a person wrote it, and they're just, these match because of these characteristics. So go through and be like, no, 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 or yes, so they know. But specifically, it is a wonderful resource if you are working with genre readers in a genre that you are not familiar with. As I mentioned, I just wrote a brand new horror trends articles for them. If you go to, you can't see it on this screenshot, but at the very top, there's a couple things, and especially for you is one of them. And if you pull that down and choose Reader's Advisory, you can pull up lists about sort of like what we did for each genre, but for every genre. And it's a little different because it's not based on the top 5, but it's an article about why people like to read this genre, what are the top books you need to know, what are some of the hot books right now, And then the trends are come in different trend articles. So you can find those very easily, and you don't have to do any work and get yourself up to speed quickly. But one of the new things they've done, which we're going to highlight on these next 2 slides, is new and popular in. And you can see that right there. This is for horror, and I believe the next slide is thriller, but let's go back to horror for 1 second. Great. There's a little drop-down box, and so horror is chosen there, but you can choose, and they have so many genres. And then this is just a screenshot of what you get. You get forthcoming, and I was looking at this and I was saying to Rebecca, wow, I have reviewed most of those books for Booklist, and somebody else I know reviewed one of them. So these really are, I can tell you as the horror expert, these are the top books right now in horror. These are the books that you need to know about right now. You can pull that list up in a month, and it might be different books. So you don't have to know. And then again, if you tickle your dismembered funny bone or serial murderers and psychopaths, there's more. These are just a few examples of the ones you can pull up that are based on appeal. Haunted houses and ghost stories. I've actually read Traveler's Rest, and it is great. It's a new book that's a haunted story. But if you want to know the newest, because these repopulate with newer books all of the time based on those appeals. So you don't have to know the newest books and why they're popular. You can use the resource to help you. Same thing with thrillers. We have all of this here. And then if you notice all of these, the same thing in your gutter on the right side about keeping up. So how to keep up those articles I mentioned, keeping up with each genre that you can get from the Especially For, you can click on them on the side when you've pulled the new and popular in, and helping readers. So getting up to speed in thrillers, spy fiction classics. It shows you all these different things that are available on Novelist. You're already paying for it. I like to say that when you have Novelist, yes, we want our patrons to use it, but it is my best secret weapon because I'm like, it makes me look so smart. And for all of these things, if you click into the books, there's already a handwritten book talk for you, or there's the review from Booklist, or if it's somebody from Library Reads, they put the Library Reads in there, what they wrote, which is even better because it's a librarian who wants you to hand sell the book. So you don't have to do any work. And then you can show your patrons how they can use it to help themselves too, and work with them to maybe do some of this appeal mixing to find books based on funny horror or psychological suspense, and use the resource that way. So please don't be afraid to do it. They're doing the work for you. You shouldn't waste your time doing that right now. You can also make book lists in Library Aware if you do have that feature. That is an add-on to Novelist, and it populates it with the information from Novelist. I know a lot of libraries in this area where we are here in Illinois have it, but I have my own subscription to Library Aware, and I've used it. It's super easy. You write a title, and up comes the cover, and you can use your own library's annotations, or you can use the ones that are already there in Novelist, and they look beautiful, and you can just print them out. Again, do it exactly. You can change it tomorrow. Like, you have a patron who wants just, they tell you, well, I really want more alternate history. Great, I can make you your own list using Library Aware, and I can email it to you, or I can put it on the Facebook page, or I can print it out for you. There's lots more options for doing it. And again, you just have to be aware that the resource is there and know some of the basic things like we talked about, the basic trends, what the genre is. Science fiction, know that it's got, space and science. And from there, you can really help someone. So I just want to encourage you to use it. They're doing the work for you, and it's okay. You're not cheating. Give you the permission to do that.
No one expects you to read every book in your collection, except for that one patron.
Except I feel like some of the librarians expect that. Yeah, that one patron. But some of the workers feel like they need to
yes,
be.
We put that onus on ourselves, don't we? Yeah, use the materials out there. And here's another piece of material you can use is your subscription to Booklist, if you've got that. Every print issue of Booklist is a spotlight theme. And they are often fiction. We've got May is our next one coming up. May is Mystery Month at Booklist, so it's all about mysteries. I've got a spotlight on science fiction, fantasy, and horror coming up this year in the August issue, so I'm going to be giving Becky all kinds of stuff to review for me in time for that. And we've got historical fiction is coming up in June, all kinds of stuff, these spotlight issues where we not only feature reviews of new books, but we give you these, which are top 10 lists and core collections. And so for top 10s, we go back the previous print year and pull out things that have gotten starred reviews, and we pick out our top 10 from that. Those are kind of another one of these quick and easy ways to get 10 books into your brain that maybe you didn't read, but these are 10 new books. They all got starred reviewed. As long as you know the basic plot and the author, you can give that to someone with confidence. We also do core collections in each of those spotlight issues, and those are lengthier annotated articles. One of the ones that I do actually in March for Women's History Month, we do a women's fiction spotlight. And so last year I did a core collection of books that were centered around sisters, so sisters in women's fiction. So there's a list of 15 books that, boom, you don't even have to read yourself. You can just pull that out. And you can find these online as well. If you are a subscriber, you of course have access to everything, and even people who aren't subscribers, you can find some of our feature articles online. If you go to booklistonline.com, and in the search box that is on the left-hand side, you can search top 10 or core collection box to bring up these feature lists. We also have our blog, which is called The Book List Reader. We do a lot of genre talk on there. It's a very simple search. Just use your genre terms in the search box on the side to find blog posts that are tagged with specific genres. There's a lot of mystery on there again. Our whole month of May is going to be mysteries. We'll do a lot of horror posts during August for our spotlight on science fiction, fantasy, and horror. We do a lot of book club stuff here as well. We have a whole sub-blog called the Book List Book Group Buzz. And so finding stuff out on the blog is another good way to just get these kind of quick dips into little genres. So that's a blog for Book List Online. And that sort of brings us to the end here. Unless there are any questions, we are at your disposal, so feel free to ask us about anything genre related.
Thank you so much, Rebecca, Katie,
Thank
and
you
Becky.
for having us. We have a question?
There's a question back there.
There was a question in the back there.
Who had a question?
Oh, yes.
Let me bring the microphone.
Yes, she'll bring
over.
you the mic, so it'll.
For the people watching in the future, because we did talk
Yes.
about science fiction,
Speaking to
the
the
microphone
future.
would be better.
I have questions about two of the specific books. Nosferatu, if you read the notes on the text first, do you spoil the book? Because I'm probably going to go do that.
No, because you won't really understand it.
Yeah, you won't understand it.
You won't
got-
understand
yeah,
it.
You won't know what he's talking about.
Yeah.
No, I won't do it. And then you said you have House of Leaves. I've heard that the pages fall out.
Right.
That does something to the story. Have you had that?
I don't know. So we had a copy in our library. I own a copy. I have not been as hard on it as library patrons are. It is only available in paperback, but I believe you can buy like a reinforced binding paperback because that book has been rebought a bunch of times. Yes, if pages fall out, that's a problem, and it is.
But I heard that if they fall out, what's left is something different.
Oh, you mean the story?
Fall out supernaturally.
So yes, there is a whole cottage industry around this book about what it really means and what pages are necessary. Yes, there are people who think that, because it's also about it's about a haunted house, it's about a haunted book, it's about a haunted. So there are lots of folklore about the book.
Well, I know what I'm going to Google when I get home. That sounds interesting.
That would you could go down a whole rabbit hole on that one.
It sounds like S by Doug Dorst and J. Abrams.
It's similar, but not as forced. Yeah, as that.
Any
I
other
own that book
questions?
too.
Other questions?
Well, hearing none, thank you again, all of you, for doing this presentation today, and for Novelist and Booklist for helping us put this on. And I don't know, your enthusiasm was infectious, because now I have like a list of books I'm going to go and check
That's
out
our
and
goal
read.
here.
These
Let's
are
read
not
them
my
all.
genres, so that's
See?
really cool. So
Perfect.
thank you everyone for coming today. We're recording this, so this will be up on the Rails website in a few days, and I will also be sending out a link to a brief survey for an evaluation. We'd really appreciate your feedback. So thank you all for coming. Thank you.
Thanks for having us.